What? What is this? I stood frozen, holding a photo I had discovered in my husband's apartment where he lived alone for work. In the photo, he's dressed in a black tuxedo, standing next to a woman who isn't me. She's in a wedding dress, and they're both grinning from ear to ear. And next to the photo, documents needed to issue a marriage certificate. Why would he have this? The documents listed my husband Ryan's name, and next to it, Jessica was written. Jessica? But this photo is unmistakable. This can't be real. The woman is someone I've known very well for a long time. Shocked, I slumped to the floor. I wish this was just a bad dream. No matter how many times I muttered it, the reality in front of me didn't change. My name is Lauren, and I'm 34 years old. I married Ryan 2 years ago. He gets along well with my parents. Whenever we visit my hometown, he shares drinks with Dad and sends flowers to Mom, who loves beautiful and cute things, every month. He's a genuinely kind person. About 6 months after our happy married life began, Ryan got transferred. The twist? His new location was in the same state as my parents. Normally, I'd happily go with him, but I had just become a manager at work. If I go with him, I'll have to quit my job. But I've worked hard and finally started to see results. I don't want to give that up. Conflicted, I agonized daily, but he would always comfort me. Even if we're apart, my feelings for you won't change. I love you. Leaving me with these comforting words, he moved for his job. It goes without saying, I fell for him even more. For a year and a half, we kept in touch daily, and he always came back to me on weekends. I'm always rooting for you, Lauren, so keep working hard. He'd say that every time we met. I was on cloud 9. Hey, I'll come to your place for your birthday next week, Ryan. What? I always feel bad that you're the one visiting. Plus, I want to see where you're living now. I said this, believing he'd be pleased. But then, no, you can't come. Why? I got an important work assignment that day. If you come over, I'll be doing overtime and it'll get late. I'd feel bad making you wait. But it's your birthday? Work doesn't care about birthdays. Well, in that case, I'll clean the apartment and cook something nice for us. Lauren, you're swamped with work every day. Don't worry about it. So reluctantly, we decided to celebrate Ryan's birthday at my place the following week. However, I had taken a personal day off for his birthday, so I secretly decided to visit him where he was working out of town. On the day, although his place was in the same state as our hometown, it was an unfamiliar station, so I had to rely on the address to find his apartment. Along the way, I spotted a grocery store and began making a mental shopping list to match the feast I was planning to cook. Of course, I had also hidden his favorite brand's shirt in my bag as a birthday gift. He's going to love this, I thought to myself, finally locating the apartment where he lived alone. The moment I used the spare key that I had but never needed, I was filled with indescribable excitement and joy. What if he didn't want me to come because his place is a mess? But then, when I opened the door, what I saw inside was completely different from what I had expected. What is this? Pink, frilly curtains hung by the windows. A red, heart-shaped cushion lay on a white sofa. Did I get the wrong apartment? I double-checked the nameplate outside, and no, it was definitely Ryan's place. What's going on? Confused, I cautiously entered the apartment. That's when I spotted something shocking on a shelf next to the closet. Is this a photo of... It was a wedding photo, featuring a bride and a groom. Worse yet, there were documents necessary for issuing a marriage certificate, signed by Ryan and Jessica. This can't be. I wish this was a bad dream. Devastated, I slumped to the floor. My thoughts are always with you, even when I'm away. Just wait for me here. I promise I'll come back. That's what my husband told me. He had always said, I love you, Lauren, whenever he returned. I had been holding on to those words, and now this betrayal? Shaken to my core, tears uncontrollably started flowing. I don't know how much time had passed when... Let's go back to that restaurant soon. Let's do it for Jessica's birthday next time. Voices I recognized came from behind the door. Hey, what happened to the key? Oh no, did you lose it? Should I go out? I could hear them fumbling for keys near the front door. I don't want to see them now. What should I do? In a panic, I grabbed my bag and shoes and hid in the closet. The door opened, and the footsteps sounded closer. Holding my breath, the two figures appeared in front of me. The man was undeniably my husband, Ryan. Next to him, a woman, dressed in designer clothes, looked up at him with a smitten expression. It was my mom. "Hey, wear the branded shirt I gifted you!" The gift she handed him is the same one I'd picked out for him. He puts it on with a pleased grin. "You look great in it," she says. "You know, I accidentally told Lauren I wanted this too," he replies. "Then maybe she's buying the same thing right now, not knowing we've already exchanged gifts," she suggests. "Could be," he agrees. "You better wear the one I gave you, Ryan." "Of course," he confirms. Peeking out from the closet, I see them lean in for a kiss. This is really happening right in front of me, just as I feared. Why is this happening? Is this some kind of joke? I think, as my mind goes blank, swirling with these thoughts. Frozen with shock and confusion, I can only stand still in the closet, hoping they don't find me. I can't handle this anymore, I think. Then I hear words that make me doubt my ears. "Never thought this would go so smoothly," one voice says. "Conspiring with your own daughter to marry me? You're something else, Jessica," another chimes in. "I have a husband, you know. If we get caught, I'd lose a lot in the divorce settlement," the first voice adds. Their faces reveal smug smiles. "Goes smoothly? What plan?" I think. Ryan and I met through a high school friend. My job was my life back then, and seeing this, a friend said to me, "Why don't you meet him? He's a good guy." That's how I was introduced to Ryan. There was no way my mom was involved. I talked him into it when he came to the place where I was working part-time, one voice explains. "Jessica is persuasive," the other adds. "You fell for it too, Ryan," the first laughs. "I got lucky when I fell for it. I'm so glad I approached Jessica back then," the other says. "When Ryan asked me to have coffee during that part-time job, I thought it was a joke. But look at the happy times it's led to," the first voice recounts. "I thought you were only a bit older than me when I approached you. Never thought there'd be a 20-year age difference. You're so beautiful, Jessica. It's hard to believe," the second voice adds. "I still am, aren't I?" the first one asks. "Absolutely," confirms the other. What is going on? Was our meeting engineered by these two all along? And here I was, loving my husband sincerely. They must have been laughing at me behind my back all this time. This isn't going down without a fight. I discreetly pulled out my cell phone from my bag and began recording their actions from inside the closet. Sitting side by side on the sofa, intertwining their legs, they whispered to each other and chuckled. When my husband started to unbutton my mom's blouse and kiss her, a surge of nausea hit me. I quickly covered my mouth and forced it down. That's when Mom said, "What's that?" and suddenly stood up, walking towards the closet. "Please don't come here. Did she notice me?" I held my breath, and she walked past me to pick up a photo frame from the adjacent shelf. "Nice to see you put up this picture." "Of course. It's a picture from our secret wedding." "I hope the day comes soon when I can submit all the documents for our marriage license." "I could divorce Lauren any time, you know." "I'm sorry. Just a little longer." "When will you finally pay off that $70K debt?" "It'll take a few more years. Till then, my husband is the perfect ATM." "Same here. Lauren is only good for working after all." Calling Dad, who has been by her side for over 35 years since she got pregnant with me at 20, an ATM. I couldn't believe such a terrible woman is my mom. And to think my husband calls me an ATM and laughs about it is just cruel. They're idiots, aren't they? Lauren falls for anything I say. She even believed I was working today, on my birthday. She's foolish, indeed. And your husband has no clue, does he? Of course not. I put on the act of the perfect wife in front of him. Classic Jessica. He travels so much, he'll never find out. The husband I loved, the mother I trusted, turned out to be my greatest enemies. I was seething with anger. He lifted her up and headed towards the bed, turning off the lights. In the dim room, voices I never wanted to hear echoed in my brain. I couldn't even cry out of despair. They won't get away with this. I'll expose them to the end of the earth. I began recording them again after sending the video and address to someone. I'll document all the evidence. Fighting back the rising disgust and nausea, I waited. Finally, a long-awaited message arrived. I'm outside the front door now. Backup had arrived. The person I messaged was, of course, Dad. Now it's time for revenge. Inhaling deeply, I swung the closet doors open. Happy birthday, Ryan! I threw the gift I was holding at the two bewildered, naked individuals, unlocked the front door, and let Dad in. What? What's going on? Their mouths hung open, wordlessly shocked. Jessica, what are you doing? I thought you were on a business trip. Lauren, why? I came to surprise you on your birthday, but it looks like I'm the one who got surprised. Lauren, this is a misunderstanding. I saw everything from the closet, and I have evidence. Ugh, well, you see... Husband was so flustered he couldn't get any words out. Jessica, explain yourself! Listen, this isn't what it looks like. I didn't want this. It was Ryan who... I've already seen Lauren's video. No more useless excuses. This was the first time I ever saw Dad, usually a calm person, so incredibly angry. His eyes were filled with rage. Come on, Lauren. Forgive me, okay? Trying to hug me, he extended the same hand that had just been holding Mom. Disgusting! I don't want to be touched by trash like you. Don't say that. When I brushed his hand away, Mom stepped in to defend Ryan. How could you say that to Ryan? Apologize, now! Excuse me, you should be the one apologizing. What's this victim act after hurting me and Dad? And siding with Ryan at a time like this is pathetic. Don't you dare speak to Jessica that way! I was completely dumbfounded by the two of them covering for each other. Is it normal for a mom to get involved with her daughter's husband? Shut up! I regret ever giving birth to a loser like you. What? I wish you were as beautiful as me. Then maybe it wouldn't be such a waste. You should be grateful I even arranged your marriage to Ryan. Her words struck me deeply, making me falter for a moment. You'd never have gotten married otherwise. That's so cruel. Just as I was on the verge of tears. How could you say such things to your own daughter? Well, she's never been cute to begin with. Enough is enough! Ryan, you promised to make Lauren happy too. Dad's glare silenced both of them. Enough of this farce! Dad brought out 2 divorce papers. They were the ones he'd picked up from the courthouse on his way here, per my request. Both of you, sign these papers right now. Then I'll go ahead and get your marriage certificates issued. Dad tossed the necessary paperwork for issuing Ryan and Jessica's marriage certificate in front of them. Wait a minute, we don't have to get a divorce. Having a divorce on record will look bad for my job. But you said you wanted to get married quickly. That was just heat of the moment. Stop joking around. I never want to see your face again. Sign, now! When I tossed the ballpoint pen at him from the shelf, perhaps overwhelmed by my stern tone and attitude, he reluctantly signed. Please, I didn't want us to break up. Is it because I'm your ATM? You won't be able to pay back that $70,000 debt if we divorce, right? What's that debt for anyway? It's, you were into nightclubs a few years back, weren't you? What? You knew? I was going to let it go since you seem to have straightened out, but now you've done something even worse. Please overlook this too. I promise, I won't do it again. No chance. Dad also extended a ballpoint pen. Buckling under the pressure, Mom also signed the divorce papers. Once he had the 2 completed divorce applications in hand, Dad stood up. You don't ever have to come back. Same goes for you. And by the way, I'll be seeking alimony in the divorce proceedings, from both sides. I'll get a lawyer, so direct all communication that way. I'll inform your company that we're getting a divorce. Goodbye. Dad and I left the room, while the 2 of them continued to shout at each other. After that, through the lawyer, we sought $30,000 each in alimony during the divorce proceedings. Since Dad did the same, that's a total of $120,000 in alimony, just from the divorce case. Furthermore, Mom had an additional debt of $70,000. She paid it off in one go, but the place she borrowed from seemed a bit sketchy. My ex-husband felt uncomfortable at his job and resigned, moving away with Jessica. Rumor has it, it wasn't so much a move as they were taken somewhere by the people they borrowed money from. Ever since that day, I've been afraid to trust people. But fortunately, I'm supported by my kind-hearted dad and trustworthy colleagues. It may take time, but I believe a happy future awaits, and I'll keep moving forward.
Get a new wife for my son. You're useless. The day our multi-generational house was finally completed. Such heartless words were thrown at me with no remorse by my mother-in-law. I knew she didn't think highly of me. Still, considering her feelings, I agreed to build the multi-generational house. Yet I never imagined being treated with such contempt. With words stuck in my throat, I stared at her with her smug smile. My husband looked pale as a ghost, but she didn't know. She didn't know the impact those words would later have. My name is Elena, 30 years old. After graduating from vocational school, I worked at a production company, drawing illustrations. 2 years ago, I became an independent contractor, and now I work as a freelance designer. There are no benefits like when I was employed, nor are there any set holidays. But my income has increased significantly, and I am able to save more than enough. My husband, Camille, who I married 3 years ago, has been my biggest supporter. He was the one that pushed me when I was contemplating becoming independent. "Elena, I believe you can be successful even on your own," he said. "But if I fail, I'll lose my income, and it will be a burden to you, Camille. Don't worry about that. We're a team, remember? If you want to try something new, I want to support you." "Camille, don't worry. Even if anything happens, you're not alone. I'll support you with all my might." "Thank you. I'll give it a shot." And so, with Camille's support, I became an independent freelancer. At first, jobs were scarce, and my income was close to zero. But with my husband's support, I didn't give up and kept going. Now, 2 years later, I have more work than I can handle, from regular jobs to major projects. Somewhere along the line, my income exceeded both my previous income and my husband's, and now my annual income exceeds $10 million. We started spending more luxurious time together, like going shopping, traveling to match my husband's days off thanks to our comfortable financial situation. Then one day, while working at home, I started feeling a little unwell. When the discomfort didn't subside after a few days, I went to the doctor, and to my surprise, I was pregnant. I went home and nervously awaited my husband's return. In the evening, as usual, he came home and I immediately brought up the topic. "Hey, Camille, you know I haven't been feeling well lately, right? So I went to the hospital today." "Oh, right. I'm sorry I couldn't go with you. Are you okay?" "Yeah, and actually, I'm pregnant." "Huh? You're pregnant?" He stared at me with wide eyes. Surprised, his bag slipped from his hand and asked, "Really?" With a big smile, I nodded. Seeing my response, Camille hugged me tightly. "Thank you. Thank you so much, Elena. I'm so happy." "Whoa, I can't breathe, Camille." "Oh, I'm sorry. I was just so happy." "Seeing you this happy makes me happy too, Camille. Let's work hard together." "Absolutely. I'll work even harder, so that you'll be okay even when you're close to giving birth and can't work." "Thank you. I plan to work until the last minute too," I told Camille, my smile emerging naturally as I saw his tearful expression. We began to eat the dinner I had prepared, but my husband could only talk about our future child. "I wonder what the gender will be. We need to prepare various baby items. Should I take paternity leave?" and so on. His excessive enthusiasm made me laugh. He was probably mulling over various aspects in his own way. At that moment, I decided to share something that I'd been contemplating for a while. "Hey, Camille, there's something I've been thinking about for some time. Would it be wrong for us to build our own house?" "Huh? A house? Ours?" "I've always thought that when we have a child, I'd like to live in a standalone house. I want to create a room for our child, and I know it may sound lavish, but I've been thinking that I'd like a study room as well." "That makes sense. Thinking about our future child, our current condominium does feel a bit cramped." "See, now that we know I'm pregnant, I'd really like to do this if we can." "Yeah, I agree. For the sake of our child who's going to be born, let's welcome them in the best environment possible." So, we decided to build a new house. We visited model rooms on our days off and started to plan the floor layout immediately, aiming to complete the house before the birth of our child. When a month had passed since we found out about my pregnancy, we decided to go to my in-laws' house to share the news. My husband's parents were there, with my father-in-law working as a company employee and my mother-in-law being a housewife. They live about a 30-minute drive away from our condominium, but we rarely visit. The reason is simple. I can't say it out loud, but I have a hard time dealing with my mother-in-law. The issue began shortly after our marriage, or it may have started when we first visited his parents' house to announce our engagement. My mother-in-law has never been welcoming towards me, always displaying a sullen expression. We used to visit their house regularly just after our marriage, but she would always ask, "No children yet?" Moreover, she didn't understand my job and often said, "Drawing for a living is not a real job," when my husband and father-in-law were not around. I gradually began to avoid going to their house due to her insensitive comments. Even when my husband suggested visiting them, I would gently decline, saying, "I have a deadline coming up." But this time, I had to go. Plus, I thought that she would be happy if we shared the news of our pregnancy. So we set off for the in-laws' house, my husband at the wheel. After not seeing her for a while, my mother-in-law greeted me with her usual sullen attitude. "Well, well, it's been a long time, hasn't it, Elena?" "Mother-in-law, it's been a while. I wonder what you've been up to. You surely haven't been drawing all this time, right?" "That's what my job is." "Well, still as sassy as ever. And here, I thought you might have changed after being away for so long." She spoke to me this way in a hushed tone when we were alone, yet played the part of the good mother-in-law in front of my husband and father-in-law. When my husband announced my pregnancy, she directed a saccharine voice towards me. "Oh my, Elena, congratulations. I'm truly happy to hear I'll be seeing my first grandchild so soon." "Uh-huh, happy. Is the baby a boy or a girl?" "No, it's still too early to tell." "Well, it doesn't really matter, as long as the baby is healthy." "Yeah, you're right." I plastered on a smile, careful not to spoil the mood. After that, we all got caught up in casual chatter, my father-in-law joining in too. Then, amidst the light-hearted banter, my husband dropped a surprising piece of news. "You know, we've decided to build a new house." His announcement got a big reaction from my mother-in-law. "What?" My ominous hunch came true as she responded with delight. "Why not make it a two-family house?" "Two-family house? You mean you guys will live with us?" "Yes. Our house is getting old. We were just debating whether to renovate or move entirely." Well, we didn't really plan to." "I'm sure the child will benefit from living with grandparents, right? You agree too, don't you, Dad?" My father-in-law, thrown into the conversation, kept his expression neutral, but there was a hint of joy as he muttered, "Yeah, I guess so." Seeing his reaction, my mother-in-law turned to me, her eyes practically shouting, "See? Elena? Honey? Dad agrees too, so it's okay, right?" I mean, it's all so sudden." "Why not? It seems more families are going nuclear these days. I'm sure we'll have a blast living together." "Well, I mean, when the baby comes, working will be hard, you know? Wouldn't it be nice to have someone close by to help out with housework?" Well, I had to admit, she had a point. I wanted to keep my job even after the baby was born, and if my mother-in-law was willing to help, that was definitely a good thing. But should we really live together? She seemed genuinely thrilled about the baby. Meanwhile, I found myself caught in a whirlpool of conflicting emotions. From then on, my mother-in-law changed her attitude towards me entirely. Regular texts started arriving on my mobile phone. "How are you feeling? If you need anything, just let me know." And other gentle messages. Maybe the pregnancy made her reconsider her attitude. I began to lower my guard just a little. One day, my husband asked, "What are we doing about the two-family house thing?" With my mother-in-law's increasing kindness, my thoughts began to shift. "Well, since your parents are so insistent, maybe we should give it a shot." "Really? Are you sure? I thought you didn't like my parents." "True, I was a bit wary of your mother and avoided going to your parents' house. But ever since we found out about the baby, she's been really kind. I think I want to give it a shot." "I see. Thank you, Elena. My mom can be a bit self-centered, but I think she's genuinely looking forward to our child." "Yeah, I get it. It really comes across." "Well, we need to revise our plans then. Let's discuss it with the construction company." A few days later, we visited the construction company we had consulted earlier and told them that we wanted to move forward with building a 2-family house. Since we had some floor plans in mind, we decided to expand on them. The plans for our new home progressed steadily, with us sometimes even bringing my in-laws along to the construction company. But I was still oblivious, unaware that this decision would lead to such a predicament. A few months later, as I was about to enter my 3rd trimester, we started the construction. When I called my mother-in-law, or MIL, to share the news, she dropped a bombshell. I've waited so long for this moment. I was getting pretty sick of having to be nice to you. What, mother-in-law? Your baby's a girl, isn't it? You're so useless. Didn't I tell you not to have anything but a boy? Wait a minute. When I told you the gender last time, you said, girls' clothes are cute. That's nice, too. That's because your husband and Camille were there. You're not an idiot, are you? Is that so? Her words hit me like a blunt object. I was speechless. She continued mercilessly. Just to let you know, it's too late to regret it now, you know? The house is already under construction. I was just buttering you up to live in the new house. Mother-in-law. Oh, by the way, I've prepared quite a few things, too. Look forward to it, okay? With that, she hung up, leaving me with the dial tone. I had no idea what mother-in-law meant by preparation, but the shock that she hadn't changed a bit was even more significant. I wanted to talk to my husband, but I couldn't muster the courage to say it to his happy face, saying, "It's almost here." I thought I would finish giving birth first, calm down, and discuss it by the time the house was finished. A few months later, our daughter was born safely, and the house was completed about half a year later. We had already told my husband the rough details, and decided to keep the relationship with mother-in-law to a minimum, but let her live in the 2-family house we had built. However, on the handover day, mother-in-law, who was swollen with anticipation, said to me, "Finally, this moment has come. Elena, thank you for your hard work. Now you're on your own. Good luck with your job and childcare." Excuse me, mother-in-law? Not just me, but my husband and father-in-law, who were present, were also at a loss for words. Thinking the house was built so anything would do, mother-in-law continued to utter ruthless words. "I'm sure you know, but I hate a charmless bride like you. If you understand, why don't you just leave with that child?" Wait a minute, what are you saying? "I've found a new bride for my son. Divorce your incompetent husband." A new bride? I've asked everyone I know who has a daughter. I looked for a docile child among them. I think she will be quiet and become a housewife, as I say. At that moment, something inside me crumbled with a crash. A new bride? You've got to be kidding. I was thinking about forgetting everything that had happened so far and allowing her to live with us. Enough. I'm going to kick her out. With a resolute mind, I clearly say to the grinning mother-in-law in front of me, "You're the one that needs to leave, mother-in-law." What? What are you talking about? It's a house built by my son, so there's no need for me to leave. Oh, you're pretty confident, aren't you? Of course. Well, even if you tell me to leave, it's my son's house, so I'll keep living here. Seeing the overly confident mother-in-law, I couldn't help but let out a laugh. Meanwhile, my husband opened his mouth slowly, his face turning pale. "Mom, don't tell me you didn't know." "Huh? What is it, Camille?" This house, this duplex, was built under Elena's name. What? The smile that mother-in-law had worn so proudly just a moment ago disappeared instantly, replaced by a shocked expression. Visibly upset, she somehow managed to put words together. What are you talking about? She doesn't even have a job. How could she? That's what I've been telling you. Elena is an independent woman. She earns much more than I do. Was that true? Of course it's true. When we decided to build this duplex, we went way over our budget. But Elena covered the excess costs. What? That can't be true. The once smiling mother-in-law quickly turned as pale as a sheet. The final blow was dealt by my father-in-law. He launched a sharp accusation at mother-in-law, who had crumpled on the spot. What was that comment you made earlier? Don't tell me you've been treating Elena like this behind our backs all along. And what was that about wanting a new wife? No, that's not it. I was just thinking about what's best for Camille. What's best for Camille? This was all your doing. How could you do this to Elena? I never thought you could be so low. I want a divorce. No, please, father-in-law announced. I'm going to get the divorce papers, and left the room. Left behind, mother-in-law turned to me, her eyes filled with tears. Elena, please! You have to help me. If things continue like this, he's going to divorce me. What do you mean, help? This is all you're doing, isn't it? Don't say that. I admit I was wrong. From now on, I'll accept you as my daughter-in-law, okay? Please. Despite her words, she wasn't sorry in the slightest. Looking at mother-in-law, who cared only about herself, I was utterly disgusted. I stared at her with the iciest stare I could muster, and let loose. Accept me? Accept me as your daughter-in-law? I couldn't care less about your acceptance. We're not a family anymore, remember? You have some nerve to say sorry without meaning a word of it, you scum. You! How could you call me scum? Excuse me? You, who's been hurling insults at me this whole time, are now playing the victim? You ruined the chance I gave you. From now on, I will never forgive you. You're not allowed in this house, and you'll never see our daughter again. If you understand, then get lost right now. You're worthless. Leaving mother-in-law where she stood, my husband and I, still holding our daughter, went inside the house. We locked the door behind us, refusing mother-in-law any access. Ignoring mother-in-law's incessant yelling outside, father-in-law returned with the divorce papers. He made mother-in-law fill them out on the spot and immediately went to file them. It turned out mother-in-law had been borrowing money from father-in-law. She was given the choice to pay back the money immediately or divorce. As a housewife with no means to pay back the money in a few days, mother-in-law reluctantly chose divorce. We let father-in-law into the house and locked the door once again. After a while, mother-in-law continued to cause a ruckus in front of our house, but before we knew it, she was gone. A bit later, it seemed that mother-in-law's sister reached out to father-in-law, saying that mother-in-law had come to her. Apparently, mother-in-law had been terrible to her sister in the past, to the point that they were almost estranged. Now, in exchange for letting mother-in-law live with her, her sister is making mother-in-law do all the housework as a sort of revenge for past grievances. I'm certain she's not living the easy life she once had. On the other hand, my family of 4 is living happily. Father-in-law, who is a man of few words, shows a lot of love to our daughter. His mere presence provides an ample amount of love for her. Looking forward, we plan to keep working together with my husband and father-in-law to create a fun and loving home.
I don't remember inviting you. Ah, she must be talking about her bragging party today, showing off her fancy high-rise apartment to everyone. Well, I don't remember being invited either, and I certainly had no desire to go. But she continued to confront me. Did you come for a tour or something? You, who can only afford such cheap and unimpressive clothes for your own daughter? She smirked, looking down on me. Hearing this, I decided to fight back. Is there a reason I shouldn't be here? Yes, this is no place for someone as poor as you. With one sentence, I stopped Jasmine in her tracks. As my words sunk in, her face turned ashen, then quickly flushed with anger. She couldn't believe what I had said and called me a lying bastard, which was rather amusing. My name is Alan, and I'm a homemaker. I did want to work, but at my husband's request, I decided to focus on our home. But every day is filled with joy as I work hard for my family. My loving husband, our dear daughter, and I lead a life full of love and dedication. This story took place a few years after my daughter was born. She had grown up, and it was time for her to attend preschool. Among several options, my husband and I chose the preschool where we believed our daughter could grow freely. At first, she was a little nervous, but she soon made many friends and enjoyed her days at preschool. I also made new friends, other moms, thanks to our children's friendships. But not all of these connections were pleasant. While most of them were kind, there were a few who always tried to one-up everyone else. The leader of this pack was Jasmine. According to other parents, Jasmine was a homemaker too, but her husband worked at a famous company. She seemed to brag a lot about being the wife of an employee at such a notable firm. Her stories were always about luxurious hotels, trips abroad, or buying designer items. Just recently, I had to listen to her boast about her lunch at a renowned chef's restaurant. While Jasmine seemed to have a few friends among the moms, I didn't want much to do with her. But it seems like we can't always choose who we encounter. On holiday, I took my daughter to the park and unexpectedly ran into Jasmine. "Oh, hello there," she approached me. Jasmine was dressed in an elegant, tight dress with delicate, strappy mules. Everything about her screamed expensive. It was all so outstandingly flashy and beautiful. Not exactly the outfit one would expect for a park outing with a child. "Hello," I managed to respond, doing my best to hide my discomfort. She then erased her expression and stared at me. I was puzzled, wondering if I'd done something wrong. But then I realized her gaze was focused on my daughter standing next to me. Upon seeing my daughter, Jasmine chuckled in a derisive manner, looking at me with a smirk, and then she turns to me with the smirk. "Hey, where do you buy your daughter's clothes?" I wonder why she's asking. Her next line answers my question quickly. "Those clothes look quite cheap. Don't you feel bad for your daughter?" Indeed, my daughter was wearing a simple t-shirt and skinny jeans that you could find anywhere. But it's not ragged, and I never really paid it any mind, so I just chuckled and let it slide. It seems like any response I give would just invite a counter-argument, so saying anything now would only lead to a headache. Better to avoid unnecessary confrontation. Seeing my forced smile, Jasmine apparently assumed she'd hit a nerve. With a triumphant look, she said, "If you can't afford anything better, let me know. I can give you some of my kids' old clothes. They're second-hand, though. If you want, I can even give you some of my clothes." I had no particular desire to accept her offer, so I responded vaguely with, "Sure, I'll keep that in mind if I ever need to." By this time, our kids were engrossed in different play equipment, so I was eager to end the conversation. "My daughter seems to want to play somewhere else, so I have to go," I told her. "Well, if you ever need help with clothes, don't hesitate to tell me." She waved flamboyantly, and we parted ways. Seeing my daughter's cheerful smile ahead of me, my irritation subsided. One day I heard Jasmine was inviting some close mom friends over to a party at her house. Apparently, she'd bought a newly built high-rise apartment with her husband's money. She probably planned to show off the apartment during her home party. I was not invited, but I had no interest in a party thrown by Jasmine and figured it would just be an opportunity for her to boast, so I didn't care. Rumor has it that there was a dress code for the dinner party. Apparently, the guests were instructed to wear ostentatious, brightly colored, and beautiful dresses, which aren't usually required at a casual home party. I also heard that moms from relatively affluent families were invited. Sure enough, looking at the guest list, there were moms with husbands working at global companies or whose families owned large pieces of land. The dress code was probably there to filter the guests. Realizing again that Jasmine judges people by their wealth, I was fed up just hearing about it. I genuinely considered how to avoid her as much as possible in the future. But as long as our kids were at the same preschool, that seemed unlikely. I hoped we'd never meet again privately, but after the recent incident at the park, I realized that we live in the same area and that it would be difficult. I wished that this problem would disappear completely someday. I even wished on a star. On another day, I found myself heading towards a high-rise apartment. I opened the automatic lock at the entrance, walked inside the building, and looked around the floor. Just then, a door creaked open. Surprisingly, the person who appeared was the haughty guardian, Jasmine. I was taken aback and stood frozen for a moment, but soon I regained my composure. "Well, hello there." No matter how much I disliked her, I figured I should at least say hello. However, Jasmine didn't respond, instead staring at me with wide eyes. We exchanged glances for a while until Jasmine furrowed her brows, a clear sign of her unhidden anger, and addressed me. "I don't remember inviting you." Ah, she's referring to today's party. I don't recall being invited either, nor did I want to attend. Well, I wasn't invited, I responded matter-of-factly. Apparently, she didn't appreciate my response. Jasmine continued to confront me. Why are you here if you weren't invited? Why am I here, you ask? Did you come here to tour this high-rise apartment, even though you can only afford to dress your daughter in such drab and lowly clothing? She snickered at me with disdain. Hearing that, I thought, now is the perfect moment to counter Jasmine. I carefully chose my words to throw at her. Do you think I shouldn't be here? Yes, this is not a place for someone like you. Why is that? Because for someone poor like you, well, this is actually my home. As my words overlapped with Jasmine's, her movements came to a complete halt. Her face turned pale when she realized what I had said. She probably hadn't expected that response at all. Her eyes were black and white, as if she didn't understand. She blinked in disbelief, trying to digest the situation. Instantly, Jasmine's face turned red with anger. What do you mean? Explain yourself. Let me clarify for you then. Actually, my husband is the president of several companies. They may not be famous companies, but thanks to the income generated from these businesses, we earn significantly more than the average person. He owns several properties across Japan, and the new high-rise apartment building where we are now is built on one of his properties. So this apartment building is owned by my husband, which means it's our home. I regularly visit this high-rise apartment because my husband entrusted its management to me. He understood that I wanted to work, so he gave me this job. I explained the situation to her in a nutshell. Upon hearing this, Jasmine raised her eyebrows and shouted, What? I didn't know about this! When I signed the contract for the apartment, I didn't meet you. I met a man who was the manager. Oh, that must have been my husband. He took over for me this time for the key handover, so I didn't get a chance to meet you. You can tell as many lies as you want. With that parting shot, she went back into her home. To my surprise, Jasmine returned to the entrance. She seemed to have gathered an assortment of things from her home, children's toys, stuffed animals, stationery, clothes, all jumbled up in her arms. You're the one dressing your kid in such pitiful clothes. Stop lying. With that, Jasmine started throwing the items she was holding at me. There's no way you earn more than me. Jasmine's sudden outburst caught me by surprise, but her rage seemed to be running unchecked. Before I had a chance to react, the object she'd thrown whizzed past me. The sound of it hitting the floor echoed hollowly, a reminder of her uncontrolled anger. I decided then that it was high time to set the record straight about the park incident as well. About my daughter's clothes that day. What? Do you remember the day we were at the park? What does that have to do with anything? My daughter loves playing in the sand. I figured she'd get dirty anyway, so I dressed her in clothes that could handle a little grime. That's a lie. It's the truth. Here, look. I pulled out my phone and showed her a photo from my album. Jasmine froze as she looked at the picture. In it, our family of 3 was all smiles, with my daughter wearing a recognizable children's brand outfit in the center. Jasmine's eyes widened even further in surprise as she took it in. You only dressed her nicely that one time, didn't you? She screeched, clinging to her last shred of denial. That's not true. Here, look at all these, I countered, showing her multiple photos. Sure enough, my daughter was seen wearing nice clothes in beautiful settings and more casual wear where it was likely she'd get dirty. At the sight of this, Jasmine clenched her fists and trembled, seemingly out of retorts. What? What? I replied, having not heard her clearly. This seemed to further upset Jasmine. What? Are you trying to say that being wealthy makes you superior? She yelled, pushing me hard on the shoulders. That was apparently the last straw. The other mothers who'd been keeping a watchful eye on the situation came outside and tried to calm Jasmine down. Jasmine kept shouting, She lied to me! There's no way she lives in this luxury apartment! She's just lying to be more popular than me! Ignoring the calming words of her friends, she continued to yell. After a while, perhaps exhausted from the constant shouting, Jasmine finally quieted down, catching her breath in heavy gasps. It was quite a sight. her hair disheveled, one slipper missing, and all around her the aftermath of her tantrum. The hallway was littered with the objects she had thrown. Toys were broken from the impact, stuffed animals lay lifeless. She must have been grabbing anything she could get her hands on, meaning the inside of the house must be a mess too. From the inside of the house, I could see our children peeking out, worried. "Are you satisfied now?" I asked, flashing my best faux smile at Jasmine, who seemed unable to retort. Her face twisted amusingly at the sight. "I hope you enjoy the luxury apartment brag party," I said, gliding past her. "And please, do clean up the mess that you made." From behind me, I heard her shout, "Liar!" It was just bravado, but it did give me a chuckle. As a result of this incident, Jasmine found herself distanced from the other close-knit mothers she knew. It seemed that her usually high-handed behavior had been a point of contention for some time. She even had the gall to make the other mothers clean up her mess. Her outrageous tantrum this time around was the last straw, painting her as an unstable individual in their eyes. The friends Jasmine thought she had amongst the mothers distanced themselves from her, and she found herself isolated in the preschool community. It was a pitiful sight to behold. To add insult to injury, rumors began to circulate that Jasmine had gotten a divorce. It was said that she was living lavishly off her husband's money, jet-setting on international trips and splurging on designer brands. This issue was the straw that broke the camel's back, as it was said that her spouse's affection and interest in her had already been waning. The incident where Jasmine threw objects at me and refused to clean up her mess was the final blow that pushed her husband over the edge. Jasmine reportedly pleaded, "Please, don't leave me." But her husband responded, "I never thought you would stoop this low. I can't stay with you anymore. I'm going to take custody of our child." And just like that, Jasmine was left all alone. Their marriage had been a secret affair where the two had eloped to a distant land. Hence, Jasmine had no one around her to lend a helping hand. Jobless Jasmine, having lost her means of living, was in a tough spot. Word of her fall from grace spread quickly through the grapevine, and finding employment was a struggle. Eventually, Jasmine managed to find work as a part-timer in a supermarket, and was said to be living in a run-down 50-year-old apartment with doors that creaked and groaned. It was reported that she was barely scraping by. After all that's happened, I sincerely hope Jasmine has learned her lesson and will no longer judge people based on their wealth.
When is Teresa ever going to leave this house? It's quite embarrassing to have a shut-in neat around the house. Have you planned your move yet? I'll be out of here by today. I can't stand the sight of you, Lenny, anyway. It was clear to anyone that Lenny, my sister-in-law, who ridiculed me with a smirk, was trying to take over our house. However, there was a reason I decided to move out and let her have the house. I had a firm belief that Lenny would not be able to live in this house for long. My name is Teresa. I live with my dad, Mom, and Lenny, my brother's wife. My brother was assigned to work overseas shortly after getting married, and Lenny firmly refused to live abroad. Lenny ended up living in our house, shamelessly so, despite being in the so-called newlywed stage and living separately from my brother. I remember well the day Lenny came to our house. She brought a lot of luggage with her and said without any remorse, "Edwin has gone overseas, so his room is vacant, right? I've decided to live there." My parents and I were baffled when Lenny came to the house without any prior discussion. When we called my brother to ask for an explanation, he was also surprised by Lenny's actions. Though my brother, who had just been assigned overseas, did respond, it was ultimately up to my parents and me, who were in direct contact with Lenny, to have the discussion. After getting married, Lenny was supposed to live in the house where my brother lived alone. However, when we asked why she suddenly came to the house, Lenny said the room was too small. I had been to my brother's room, and it didn't seem too small. But Lenny had already unilaterally terminated the lease of my brother's room. Since her parents lived far away and our house was conveniently located for her to get to work, she insisted on living in the house. Naturally, my parents were angry about Lenny's outrageous behavior, but Lenny was smart. "Edwin has gone overseas, and I'm lonely too. Of course, I plan to contribute financially since I'll be living here. I'll also do my best with housework, so please, let me stay in this house." When Lenny pleaded like this, my parents couldn't refuse. I think one of the reasons my parents couldn't strongly reject Lenny was for my brother's sake. My parents didn't seem to mind living with Lenny, which had started suddenly. They were angry about her coming without any discussion, but Lenny was doing housework, as she said, going to work, and paying rent to my parents. However, I was nothing but dissatisfied. For some reason I don't know, Lenny had made me her enemy. "Oh, Teresa, you're as unattractive as ever today." I was utterly surprised when she said that as soon as she saw me when I came out of my room in the morning. I don't think my face is attractive at all, but I was naturally surprised when she suddenly said such a thing. "Teresa, aren't you ashamed to be a shut-in all the time? Edwin is so respectable, going on an overseas assignment, and my in-laws have earned enough to live in such a large house, while you, Teresa, are just a neat, playing at home all the time. I would be too ashamed to stay in such a house if I were you." Today, my parents were at work and Lenny seemed to be off. Is she assuming I won't tell our parents about her nasty words? No need to feel embarrassed. I'm not a neat, I answer, laughing internally at her absurdity. Sure, my job requires me to be at home a lot, but that doesn't make me a neat. But my sincere answer simply triggers a burst of laughter from Lenny. "Oh, come on, Teresa. Your brother's a successful man, and I work for a prestigious company. Even your parents are respected employees. I understand you might feel a bit inferior, but there's no need to lie." "I'm not lying. I'm an influencer." "An influencer? Please, stop making me laugh. As if someone as plain as you could be an influencer. That's a job for gorgeous models." She responds, brushing her elegantly curled hair off her shoulder, ignoring my protests, and shoving past me. As she strides away, a heavy cloud of her perfume lingers in the air. "When will you finally move out, Teresa? It's so embarrassing to have a shut-in neat in the house. Have you found a new place yet?" She suddenly stops mid-stride, turning around with a malicious grin on her face. "I'll give you an allowance, Teresa. You must be in dire need of money, right? It's only fair for all the housework you do." Laughing softly, she pulls a few $10 bills from her wallet and throws them onto the floor. "Well, see you," she says, leaving the house. Her dismissive attitude really gets under my skin. I'm not only frustrated with Lenny, but also disappointed with my brother's lack of discernment. Did they really think I would just stay silent after such a provocation? Perhaps Lenny saw me as a quiet and meek sister-in-law, but I'm not the type of woman to just sit back and take it. I pick up the strewn money, open the door to Lenny's room without her permission, and throw it inside. She sure had a lot of nerve, acting so high and mighty over a few tens of dollars. Luckily for me, I'm not strapped for cash. I had planned to relax today, but now it seems I'll be quite busy. After tidying up and finishing my work for the day, I start packing my things. I can't stand living under the same roof as Lenny any longer. I decide to move in to my boyfriend's house. Nathan, my boyfriend, with whom I've been discussing marriage plans, is understanding and agrees to accommodate me as soon as I explain the situation. Meanwhile, I make a call to a certain place in the morning. From the moment she came to greet us as a prospective wife, Lenny had always looked down on me. She's probably the type of person who needs to assert her dominance over someone to feel alive. By the time I finish my tasks, my parents return home. I don't mention anything about Lenny. Instead, I join my parents for dinner, a meal I had prepared. Lenny, who had claimed to be out with friends, hadn't returned yet. She said she wouldn't be home for dinner, so I guess she'll return late. I chose not to tell my parents about Lenny yet, waiting for the right moment. Lenny was in for a surprise, and I planned to hit her with it at the worst possible moment. "I'm moving in with Nathan starting today. I'll be out of here by tonight." "That's quite sudden. Nathan's okay with it?" "Yep, He agreed, and we're thinking about getting married soon. Well, as long as it's fine by him, just make sure to let him know we said hi. I broke the news to my worried parents, finished washing the dishes with my melancholic mom, and then I picked up my packed belongings and headed out of my room. And there, right on cue, stood Lenny. Dolled up in heavy makeup, Lenny's grin stretched across her face like she'd just spotted her prey. "When will you finally leave this house, Teresa? It's so embarrassing to have a shut-in neat like you around. Is your moving day coming soon?" "I'll be gone today. Trust me, I'm as eager to get away from you as you are to see me gone." Lenny's expression twisted in response to my direct reply. She glared at her cheeky sister-in-law. Her ugly face was truly a sight to behold. No offense to my brother, but I could do without a sister-in-law like her. The next time we'd meet, I'd be ready to serve her a dose of revenge. Well, excuse me then. I bid Lenny farewell, said goodbye to my parents who were relaxing in front of the television downstairs, and left the house. Nathan had said to me, "You probably won't need to deal with your sister-in-law again." But I loved my brother. He was a good-natured man being duped by Lenny, and I couldn't just stand by knowing that. Thanks for your concern, but Lenny needs to be completely ousted from our house. A few days after I left home, I got a call from Mom. "You, giving us such a shock by suddenly sending that. Just come home and explain. We've already informed your brother, but he can't make it back right away, so we'll video call him. We've also asked Lenny to take off from work, so hurry back." I responded to Mom's call, which came in late in the afternoon with an okay, and after texting Nathan that I was heading to my parents' house, I left. The family house that I returned to after several days felt heavy with tension the moment I walked in. As I approached the living room, Lenny's cries became louder. When I opened the door, Lenny was hunched over in front of my parents, seated on the sofa. I could feel her glaring at me. "Teresa, this is terrible. Why would you send these pictures?" Lenny pointed to a series of pictures sprawled across the coffee table. The pictures were of Lenny with various men at different locations, some with arms linked, hands held, images of intimacy. The sender, as Lenny indicated, was, of course, me. Private investigators can be quite useful, I thought. On the morning I left home, I had contacted a private investigator to check if my sister-in-law was cheating, transferred the money, and that was it. From just that, such indisputable evidence was procured. "You're the terrible one. What do you mean by doing whatever you want just because I'm not there?" The one shouting was my brother, connected via video call. His face, displayed on the screen, was beet red from anger. Lenny cried out to my brother, "But I was lonely. You always travel abroad even though we're newlyweds, Edwin. You left me alone. You're the one at fault, Edwin." I could feel the anger radiating from my parents' faces, but I calmly stated, "You're right. The fault lies with my brother." Lenny's expression turned to one of disbelief as she looked at me. I leveled my gaze at her, allowing no warmth to seep through. "The real problem is my brother's lack of judgment in choosing a woman like you." Lenny, taken aback at my words, leaned in toward me, fuming. "What? You've got some nerve, you hideous shut-in, telling me such things. All this chaos, it's your fault." Despite the presence of my parents and brother, Lenny couldn't hold back her true colors. As she realized what she had just blurted out, her hand flew to her mouth. But it was too late. My parents and brother were taken aback, but I just flatly declared, "Lenny is always like this. Lenny thinks of me as an ugly shut-in. She played the nice girl in front of everyone else, but she cheats and she doesn't hesitate to be abusive to anyone she perceives as beneath her. My brother is also at fault for choosing to marry such a person." "I was just stating the truth. After all, Teresa is a shut-in, not an influencer. That's just a lie, right?" The one who sighed at Lenny's brazen defiance was Mom. I had no idea that Lenny was like this. Yes, Teresa spends a lot of time at home, but she's not a shut-in. She's a real influencer. Eh? As Lenny gasped in surprise, I shared the name I use for my influencer activities. I suggested she look it up on her mobile phone, and she hurriedly began her search. Upon seeing the search results, a flustered Lenny looked back and forth between me and her phone. Then, with an expression of disbelief, she pointed at me. Really? Teresa is this person? Yep. Makeup is like magic, isn't it? I'm a beauty influencer. Born with a nondescript face, I use makeup to transform it, creating countless videos of my makeovers and posting them online. I sometimes receive requests from cosmetic companies to advertise their products in my videos. Thankfully, I have a large fan base, and when people think of beauty influencers, my name is often one that comes to mind. This house was built with the money Teresa earned. This huge house? Lenny gasped in response. I guess it's hard to believe that someone like me could have built a house in such a prime location so close to the station. As Lenny stood there, dumbfounded, the doorbell rang. Wondering who could be visiting at such an hour, I, the only one standing, answered it. A familiar voice rang out. Can I come in? Yeah, sure, I responded, and the owner of the voice entered. Seeing Nathan walk in through the living room door, Lenny recoiled. What? Why is Nathan here? Oh, you must be the sister-in-law I've heard about. It's nice to know you recognize me. Thank you. Nathan replied, his radiant smile lighting up the room. He's been an actor since his childhood. We had met at a social gathering for content creators and hit it off right away. Nathan and I had been in a relationship for several years, but we kept it a secret. Upon Nathan's appearance, it seemed that Lenny really believed that I was an influencer. Lenny weakly murmured, "No way." From the other side of the screen, my brother told her, "This isn't a time for you to be upset about that." Things quickly spiraled from there. My brother declared to Lenny that he would demand a settlement and file for divorce. He was going to take a break and return to the U.S., and until then, he instructed Lenny to wait. Lenny's parents lived far away, so she had to stay at our house until my brother returned. With our parents looking at Lenny as if she were something disgusting, it was clear that the days until my brother's return would be harsh and painful for her. Once we confirmed that my brother had escaped a woman like Lenny, Nathan and I decided to head home. On the drive back, I asked Nathan, "Why did you come with me?" He replied, "I didn't want my future wife, Teresa, to be mistreated." I found myself smiling at Nathan's kindness. My brother returned to the States 2 weeks later. During that time, Lenny had apparently taken a leave and locked herself in her room. While drafting the divorce papers, she was said to be crying, "I love Edwin the most." But my brother didn't waver at all. After the divorce was finalized, Lenny apparently began living alone. But the men who used to entertain her wouldn't associate with her anymore due to the shock of the divorce or subsequent weight loss. Unable to receive help from anyone, Lenny repeatedly called my brother, but he blocked her calls. Furthermore, he went abroad again, leaving Lenny with no one to rely on. She quit her job and returned to her parents' home. Ironically, Lenny, who used to mock shut-in neets, had become one herself. Since then, my brother has been careful about his relationships with women, but he met a wonderful woman abroad and married her. The new sister-in-law, a brave woman with beautiful blonde hair, is learning English so that she can communicate with me and our parents. In time, Nathan and I also got married. Our wedding made the news. The marriage of Nathan, who had been beloved since his childhood acting days, was celebrated, and I was accepted by the public as Nathan's wife. Now that everything is resolved and peaceful, my family and I are living happily.
I'm going to spend the weekend at my parents' house. I asked my husband if everything was okay as a response to his sudden declaration. It's my parents' 40th wedding anniversary. I figured I should celebrate with them. Really? Then I should go too, right? I thought about it. But it's their anniversary, not a birthday. I'd feel bad dragging you away from your busy work schedule. He was right. I'd be coming off a night shift that day. I decided to embrace his words as a chance to relax at home. I get along well with his parents, and they always take good care of me. Maybe I can send something later to celebrate. My name is Rachel. I'm a nurse, and I'm 32. I met my husband John 3 years ago. We've been married for 2 years now. It feels like we've been together for a long time, but it was nothing compared to his parents' 40 years. His parents have a beautiful relationship, always going out together and even holding hands while taking walks. I look up to them, especially since my parents are divorced. I've always dreamed of having a similar kind of relationship with my husband. One Friday night, John came home with bags full of groceries. I'm cooking at home tomorrow. Cooking is a hobby of his, and he's quite good at it. While I tend to focus on whether something is edible, John is the type who relentlessly pursues the deliciousness of food. We usually take turns cooking, and John's meals are always delicious. But of course they are. He uses quality ingredients. The worst part is, he always leaves me to do the dishes. Not just the dishes, but the pots and pans too. I've asked him to not just cook, but to do the dishes as well. But he never seemed to listen. Don't leave the dishes for your mother to take care of, okay? I reminded him, not wanting to burden his mother on such a special day. He brushed it off with a casual, yeah, as if he didn't take it too seriously, which left me feeling slightly irritated. I asked him to say hi to his parents for me and started getting ready for my night shift. The following day after my shift, I was woken up by a call on my cell phone. It was from my father-in-law. This was unusual because my mother-in-law is usually the one to call. As I answered the phone, I heard my father-in-law's frantic voice on the other end. Rachel, my wife has collapsed. What should I do? What? I jumped out of bed and asked my father-in-law for details. Apparently, she suddenly collapsed, and it seems she has a fever. It's been pretty hot out, so it could be a heat stroke. She was only half conscious, and so I told him to call an ambulance and to let me know when he found out where she'd be taken. I decided to drive to my in-laws' house, which is about a 40-minute drive from my home. I tried calling my husband, but he didn't pick up or call back. As I started to give up on trying to reach him, my father-in-law called again. As suspected, she had a heat stroke and had been rushed to the hospital. I arrived at the hospital and found my father-in-law. He told me that my mother-in-law's condition wasn't critical and is that she is currently receiving an IV. I made my way towards her hospital room. By the way, where's John? Is he in her room? My father-in-law looked puzzled. Wasn't he with you? I tried calling him first, but couldn't get through, so I called you. I assumed he was driving. Hearing this, I furrowed my brow in confusion. But John was over at your place, wasn't he? Now it was my father-in-law's turn to furrow his brow. We exchanged puzzled looks as we walked, but our conversation was interrupted as we reached my mother-in-law's room. Thank God it's nothing serious. Upon hearing that, my mother-in-law, who seemed less energetic than usual, smiled. I'm sorry for all the trouble. Were you at work today? I just finished my night shift, actually. Where's John? Is he working? These words hit me. He said he was heading over to cook you guys a special anniversary meal. The three of us exchanged glances, feeling that something was off. Calling John again. Finally, after several attempts, I managed to get through to him. Oh, thank goodness. Where are you? He responded with something completely unexpected. I'm at my parents', cooking up a storm as filial duty. Sure enough, I heard the sound of chopping over the phone. I managed to think quickly and covered up my confusion. Ah, I see. I must have been half asleep. Sorry about that. You're probably tired from work. I told them you were working, so rest up. John insisted that he was at his parents' place. But his parents were right in front of me. So, who on earth was John cooking for? Was he cheating on me? Did he show any signs of it elsewhere? I tried to recall our past interactions, but I couldn't remember anything that might confirm such a suspicion. If I had to point out something, he has been coming home late more often, and I happened to find a receipt from a store for beer and hard seltzer a while ago. I asked about the hard seltzer because John only drinks beer, but he told me that he bought some drinks with a colleague on their way home. They had a venting session while having drinks. I found it understandable and accepted his explanation. These points alone didn't constitute conclusive evidence. As I contemplated such thoughts, my concerned father-in-law came out of the room to check on me. Is something wrong? Is John coming? It seems like he had to make an unexpected stop at work. He needs to take care of some trouble, and he might have to work through the night today. I quickly made up a lie. I see. I'm sorry to put you through all of this. It looks like everything's fine now, so go home and rest. Upon hearing my father-in-law's words, I nodded and headed home. If John really was having an affair, what should I do? If he was going to come home soon, it might be best to pretend to know nothing. I still loved John, and I get along well with his parents. John was always concerned about me, whether it was about my work or my health. He always showed care and worry. Pondering my next move, I arrived home and decided to do a little digging into my husband's belongings. I entered his room. But since I go in there all the time, I didn't find anything suspicious. When I got back to the living room, I noticed a computer. I have my own laptop, so I never used this one. Maybe I'd find something. I opened up the browser history. It seemed he'd been browsing travel sites. Specifically, he was looking at hotels with kitchens. Was that why he was stocking up on groceries? Was he planning to take it to a romantic getaway with a mistress? Still, I wasn't suspicious of my husband to that extent yet. Even today, he might be gathering with friends for all I know. He might have lied about going to his parents' place because he felt guilty about going to have fun while I worked. But the next moment, that thought crumbled. I found a bookmark for a site that allows you to save photos. With a sense of dread, I looked and found definitive evidence of an affair. There were many photos of John with another woman, at dating spots, amusement parks, and some of which looked like they were on a trip somewhere. There were even some nude ones among them. What's more, it seems that it's been happening since shortly after we got married. Which meant I had been deceived by John for 2 years. Once I realized that, I knew I couldn't continue living like this. I also found their email exchanges. I learned from an email that the other woman shared the same birthday as me. Reading through the emails and looking at the photos, I saw that he gifted her jewelry and watches for her birthdays. On my birthdays, he gave me practical things like aprons to help with housework or recipe books to improve my cooking. The difference in gifts given to the mistress was like night and day. Moreover, the mistress was the one he'd been celebrating on the day of our shared birthday. I often worked night shifts, so our schedules didn't always match, but I never thought she was the higher priority. My feelings towards John took a complete 180-degree turn. The mistress was a junior colleague of John's. She even came to our wedding. I remember she came up to me and said, "I have the same birthday as you." Judging from the emails, it seemed like the mistress initiated the affair, but John had easily accepted her invitations to go out. I discovered an email where he said, "My wife earns a decent income, and she nurses me without complaints when I'm sick, so I don't plan on divorcing her for now." Upon finding this, there was no way I could stay silent. I decided on divorce. I captured some of this evidence on my phone. Upon realizing that it was already midnight, I decided to go to bed. The next day, I started looking for a divorce attorney, but I had no idea which one to choose. Just as I was lost in my thoughts, the doorbell rang. I flinched, thinking that my husband might have come home, but when I went to open the door, it turned out to be my mother-in-law. Startled, I invited her in. I learned that she returned home from the hospital yesterday, right after she got her IV, and was now here to thank me. She even brought me a small gift. As I spoke with my mother-in-law, a sense of sadness began to overwhelm me. I was lucky to have such wonderful in-laws, and the thought of leaving them was heartbreaking. Seeing my distress, my mother-in-law spoke to me kindly. "If something's bothering you, you can talk to me about it." Moved by her words, I couldn't help but pour out everything to her. When I finished, I was worried that she might be angry at what I'd said about her son. "Is that true? That's unforgivable." I showed her the evidence of John's infidelity, and she became more incensed. "Cheating makes no one happy. Why would John do something like this?" Then, to my surprise, my mother-in-law made a proposal I hadn't expected. "Rachel, why don't you pack your bags and come to our house?" "What?" While I was still surprised, my mother-in-law started making a phone call. It seemed she was talking to my father-in-law. I heard her telling him to prepare a room at their home. Encouraged by my mother-in-law, I began to pack my things. The immediate essentials I needed were just a change of clothes and my laptop. We decided on moving out the bigger items later. After I loaded my bag into my car and my mother-in-law got settled, we drove to her house where my father-in-law greeted us. There was a woman I didn't recognize sitting in the living room. Just as I was wondering who she was, I learned she was a lawyer. My father-in-law had reached out to her at my mother-in-law's request. "You have to act quickly in situations like this." He seemed quite pleased with himself as he said. In front of my in-laws, I expressed to the lawyer that I wanted a divorce and that I intended to claim alimony. I struggled to keep up with the sudden turns of events, but expressing my intentions gave me a sense of determination. The thought that I was being treated like a cash cow, belittled by my husband and his mistress, made my blood boil. Even his own parents were furious at his behavior. That night, I received a phone call from home. "Where are you? I dropped my cell phone in water and couldn't contact you. Sorry." The moment I heard John's voice, my anger peaked. "I've moved out. It's up to you to decide whether you want to stay or move out. I'll collect the rest of my belongings by the end of the week." Upon hearing this, John started panicking. "What? What are you talking about? What's happening?" At his words, I felt nothing but anger. "You've been cheating on me, and now you're asking me what's happening?" John, seemingly confused, started spouting nonsense. "Cheat? Me? Why? How?" He seemed eager to ask how I found out. That was when my mother-in-law took the phone from me. "Come home immediately." "Huh? Mom? What?" Ignoring my confused husband, I hung up the phone. Less than an hour later, John arrived at his parents' house. "Rachel, what's going on? Why are you here?" I sighed at John, who rushed in after hastily opening the door. "How did it feel to serve homemade meals to your mistress in a hotel with a kitchen?" Upon hearing this, John went pale. "How did you have the nerve to say that you were going to celebrate your parents' 40th anniversary with a homemade meal? You had the audacity to go on trips with your lover while your mother was in the hospital. Huh? What happened to Mom?" Then, at that moment, John's father came out and started yelling. "Your mother was taken away in an ambulance. I called you several times. You're not welcome in this house after today. Once we're done talking, don't ever show your face here again. Also, I want you to return the car you drove here. It's still in my name." John's father snatched the car keys from him. Because John commutes by car, I knew how inconvenient it would be for him to have this option taken away. Inwardly, I felt a bitter sense of satisfaction. Later, my mother-in-law came out and shouted, "We know everything about your shameful affair. Your father and I are on Rachel's side, not yours." Our lawyer had already left, so I directly expressed my intention to get a divorce. John panicked with a pale face. "Divorce? We can't. Why? I always help with household chores. I even cook." At my husband's desperate reaction, all I was able to do was sigh. "Helping out with household chores? You mean taking out the trash or putting away laundry? You don't even know how to use the washing machine. Have you ever cleaned the bathroom or the toilet?" "But I cook." His words made me snap. "You claim to be cooking, but cooking is complete when you clean up afterwards. You buy fancy ingredients, cook, and then act all smug saying, 'Isn't it delicious?' Well, of course it's delicious. Shouldn't you be considering the food expenses when cooking?" John retorted, obviously irritated. "Huh? My dishes taste way better than yours. Cleaning up is easy. It's the cooking that's hard. Just yesterday, my girl told me everything was delicious." He was obviously referring to his mistress. Well, of course, in a hotel kitchen, you don't have to worry about cleaning up. She got to enjoy the expensive food you bought with your money, so of course she thought it was delicious. John, who didn't like my tone, yelled back, "Fine then, let's get a divorce or whatever. I'm done with you." He stormed out of the house. With his car keys taken away by my father-in-law, he reluctantly started walking. He looked pathetic from the back. The following day, I closed the bank account from which our living expenses were being withdrawn from. I wasn't going to pay for rent or any of the utility bills with my money anymore. I sent the divorce papers to John and made sure to include a substantial claim for property division and compensation for emotional distress. John, perhaps out of rage, agreed to the divorce and even the financial terms. He made a single payment to cover the expenses, but it appears that his savings fell short and he had to take out a loan from a consumer loan company. When I went to pick up my belongings later, I saw some unfamiliar items in the house. Perhaps the mistress had moved in. But that wasn't my problem anymore. Of course, I demanded compensation from the mistress through my lawyer as well. A month later, I received a phone call from my ex-husband. "I'm receiving bills for rent and electricity." He'd just realized it now. Well, that's to be expected since the bills weren't being automatically withdrawn anymore. "Of course you receive them. I've closed the bank account we were using for withdrawals." My ex-husband was speechless. "Why should I be responsible for paying rent for a place I don't even live in? Your standard of living will have to drop a bit, but you guys will figure it out. Although I doubt you can afford to keep living there on your salary." With that, I hung up the phone. He makes about half of what I make. If he pays the rent, he'll hardly have any money left for living expenses. The truth is, I had been covering a significant portion of our living expenses. My ex-husband later asked to reconcile, but of course I ignored him. According to John's parents, he became uncomfortable at his job and quit. He showed up at their place, but his father turned him away. I had already moved out of his parents' house and rented an apartment. I don't communicate with my ex-husband anymore, but I occasionally get in touch with his parents, and we still have a good relationship. Seeing them walking hand in hand to this day, I made up my mind to find someone with whom I could eventually have such a relationship.
What do you mean you threw away the wall clock I gave you? It was $3,000. Mother-in-law shot me an angry glare, raising her voice. Isabel, how could you keep something like that in our house, even if it's expensive? I tried to stay calm, but couldn't contain my emotions. I glared back at mother-in-law, expressing my distrust. That beautiful wall clock had an unbelievable twist to it. My name is Sasha. I'm 33. I was proposed to by Daniel, who is 5 years older than me, and we got married. Daniel was my boss at work. I was drawn to him because he was always there for me, not just for work problems, but for personal ones too. I genuinely hoped to get along with mother-in-law and build a good relationship when I decided to marry Daniel. He always wanted us to get married soon. I think my mom would be so happy to meet you before we marry. I've always wanted to meet your mother. Let's definitely go. Daniel's father left a legacy, but passed away early. Being the only child, it seemed Daniel was raised with a lot of care by mother-in-law, and he wanted to give her peace of mind by marrying soon. With butterflies in my stomach, I went with Daniel to his childhood home where mother-in-law was waiting. The moment mother-in-law saw me after answering the doorbell, her expression changed. "You look rather plain." Mother-in-law whispered in my ear, ensuring it was barely audible. I was taken aback by the unexpected remark and stared at mother-in-law in shock. Daniel seemed completely unaware of what had just transpired. "Come on in and make yourselves at home." As if nothing had happened, mother-in-law invited us inside. Did I just imagine what Isabel said earlier? I was puzzled, but reassured myself that mother-in-law meeting me for the first time couldn't possibly be that rude. Later, when mother-in-law was preparing tea in the kitchen, I went to help, and she started bombarding me with questions. How old are you? What's your educational background? I am 33. I went to a community college and have been working at my current job since graduation. I was taken aback by her sudden questions about my age, but I answered politely. But mother-in-law's attitude changed instantly upon hearing my reply. Not so young, and not very well educated. I wonder what he sees in you. Excuse me? I couldn't hide my shock at this rude remark. Do you really think you're good enough for my son? You're not even that pretty and don't seem to have any redeeming qualities. You don't need to go that far. I wanted adorable grandchildren to show off, but I doubt you can give me that. I can't boast about a daughter-in-law like you. Mother-in-law clearly disapproved of our marriage. How can she demean me like this when her son isn't around? Yet, I didn't want to cause a scene before the wedding and upset Daniel. Honestly, my first impression of mother-in-law was terrible. I didn't want to confront her and make things awkward with Daniel, who's always been caring and kind to me. So I decided to ignore her hurtful comments and endure them. Not long after we had our wedding. Since then, I've been managing both my job and household chores. Daniel, however, didn't help with the chores and left everything to me. Gradually, I felt overwhelmed doing housework alone and decided to talk to Daniel. Could you help a little with the chores? We're both working and doing everything alone is tough. I tried to put it gently, but Daniel's attitude changed sharply. Women are supposed to do the housework. My mom managed everything on her own. Why can't you? But Isabel was a housewife, right? We both work. Anyway, I don't need to do what women should. Just handle it. I can't believe. Since our marriage, Daniel had become cold. He used to be so caring and dependable at work, but now he seems to view me more as a housekeeper than his wife. Furthermore, mother-in-law began to interfere in our married life. Living close to our new home, mother-in-law would frequently drop by. She seemed to monitor me, and any little thing that she didn't approve of, she'd point out. She even threw out my dishes, exclaiming, "This tastes horrible. How can anyone eat this?" And if she found a speck of dust, she'd say, "Look at this dirt," and make me clean repeatedly. You're really an incompetent daughter-in-law. I'm sorry. You're not fit for my son. I should move in and train you right. The idea of living with mother-in-law was horrifying. If we lived together, I envisioned being berated daily and taken advantage of. I appreciate the offer, but I want to spend time with Daniel right now. You're rejecting my generous offer, despite being such a failure of a daughter-in-law? Since then, mother-in-law kept pushing for us to live together. Exhausted, I turned to Daniel. It's your fault you can't get along with Mom. Do your chores properly, so she won't worry. Daniel seemed disinterested and didn't take my concerns seriously, leaving me drained dealing with mother-in-law. However, about a week later, mother-in-law stopped coming over and the pressure to live together ceased. Thank God she finally understands how I feel. Surprisingly, she gifted me an antique-looking beautiful wall clock that clearly was expensive. You haven't received a wedding gift yet, right? This clock is worth $3,000. Take good care of it. Thank you so much for this beautiful clock. I felt joy, thinking I was finally accepted as a family member. However, after receiving the clock, mother-in-law's phone calls began to include bizarre comments. If you have time to nap in the living room, you should be doing chores. How did you know I was resting for a bit? I can easily imagine what an inefficient daughter-in-law like you would do. Once might be a coincidence, but after that, frequent calls started coming in with comments like, "Relying on store-bought meals is lazy, and if you have time to watch TV, you should be doing housework." I was deeply unnerved, wondering how she knew what I was doing. Come to think of it, these calls began right after I received that clock. It felt as though the clock was watching my every move. Could it be? To confirm my suspicion, I took off the clock's cover to inspect the inside. Just as I thought. To my horror, I found something inside. I took a picture of it as evidence and immediately disposed of the clock. That evening when Daniel returned from work, he immediately noticed the clock's absence. "Where's the beautiful clock?" I got rid of it, because that clock... Before I could explain, Daniel flared up in anger. "What? You threw away an important gift from Mom? That's it. We're getting a divorce." Without listening to me, he stormed off to his mother's house. The mention of divorce, especially so soon into our marriage, left me devastated and speechless. He won't even talk or face me. Daniel doesn't trust me. This isn't fair. Overwhelmed with frustration and wanting to change the situation, I decided, I can't let it end like this. The next day, determined to prove my innocence and expose mother-in-law's deeds, I visited her home. "Showing up without notice. Clearly your parents didn't raise you right. What do you want?" "You should know why I'm here." "What are you talking about?" "I disposed of that clock you gave me. It had no place in our home." Mother-in-law's eyes blazed with fury as she shouted hysterically, "How could you? Do you know the value of that clock? Must have been valuable to you, considering you could spy on our home with it." Yes, inside that clock was a tiny built-in camera. But when confronted, mother-in-law arrogantly smirked. "Caught on quicker than I thought. It was to expose what an inadequate daughter-in-law you are." "Excuse me. I thought if my son knew how useless you are, he'd divorce you and find someone better. What you did is a crime." Despite my sincere anger, mother-in-law mocked me with a sarcastic grin. "But there is no evidence left, is there? You impulsively threw the clock away, after all. When Daniel finds out about the hidden camera, he won't forgive even you." "We'll see. He's on my side. Plus, thanks to the clock, I succeeded in driving a wedge between you two. It was worth every penny." Mother-in-law looked at me with disdain, not showing an ounce of remorse for her actions. I discreetly slipped my hand into my pocket. Her arrogance would be her downfall. Unbeknownst to the smug mother-in-law, I had secretly recorded our entire conversation. Surely playing this record to Daniel would make him understand why I threw away the clock. Since our marriage, Daniel rarely listened to my side of the story, but this time, I hoped he would truly be supportive. That night, when Daniel returned home briefly for an errand, I opened up about everything that transpired with mother-in-law. As he listened, his face grew increasingly stern. I thought, finally, he understands. But to my surprise, Daniel's response was not what I expected. "You and your wild imaginations. Cool your head and apologize to Mom." "You don't believe me. I have evidence right here. Why would Mom do such a thing? Stop lying. Just believe me for once." "Enough. The only reason I came back was to give you this." Without letting me finish, Daniel presented me with divorce papers. Why couldn't he understand? He had shattered all my hopes. Daniel wasn't willing to listen to me and clearly did not trust me. I had given him one last chance to make things right, but I realized I couldn't stay married to a man like him. Without hesitation, I signed the divorce papers. Later that day, armed with the photographic and recorded evidence, I headed to the police station to take action. "It's no joke. I just took a little peek in my daughter-in-law's private life in exchange for giving her an expensive clock." When the police arrived, mother-in-law lashed out, swinging her arms in a frenzy. Her violent outburst led to her being arrested, not only for invasion of privacy, but also for assaulting an officer. The commotion drew the attention of many neighbors, and of course, from a distance, I watched as Daniel noticed me and approached, fuming. "What have you done? Release Mom now and apologize." "Remember when I tried to tell you about the camera? Had you listened to me, none of this would have happened." "But do you really want your own mother to be labeled a criminal?" Confronted with the reality of the situation, Daniel's face turned pale, and he profusely apologized. "I was wrong. I'll do anything. Please forgive me. After we got married, you rarely listened to me, and when I told you about the hidden camera, you didn't believe me. Do you realize how much that hurt me? I didn't want to believe Mom could do something like that. I hoped everything would be fine if I denied your claims. I was kind of aware since Mom had been calling me about what you were doing at home." "You knew about the hidden camera and the clock?" It wasn't that I knew for sure, but I wanted an easy way out. I'm so sorry. I'll make it up to you in any way. But his apologies now felt hollow. Knowing that he was aware of the hidden camera, yet still blamed me and thrust divorce papers at me, was unforgivable. I've recorded our conversation. As for the divorce settlement, be prepared to pay. Whether or not I'll press charges against Isabel depends on how you make amends. Following negotiations, Daniel agreed to pay a compensation of 3 million yen. Meanwhile, interactions with mother-in-law, who was held in detention, were done through my attorney. I don't want to be a criminal, please forgive me. During a meeting with her lawyer, I heard she was inconsolable and continuously wept. In the end, mother-in-law was released after paying a settlement of 1 million yen. However, the news of her spying quickly spread throughout the neighborhood. With her high pride, mother-in-law became too embarrassed to step outside, becoming isolated as neighbors and acquaintances kept their distance. Daniel, who always defended mother-in-law, also faced cold stares. It seems no one expects him to find a young and beautiful partner, let alone remarry. Since we worked at the same place, the news of our divorce spread quickly. The awkwardness at work was palpable, and before long, Daniel resigned. On the other hand, I've managed to move on from both mother-in-law and Daniel, and I am now very happy. My hard work has been recognized, and I even received a promotion. I believe that after hardships in life, happiness will always come around. With that belief, I'm living each day to the fullest.
Hey, why are you acting like it's normal to show up? Auntie, I told you to skip my wedding. My niece sneered as she asked me not to attend her wedding. Ever since my brother passed away 11 years ago, I had raised her like she was my own daughter. But there was a reason she suddenly started hurting such harsh words at me. My name is Effie, and my brother, Jason, was 12 years older than me. Jason was a kind soul. When we were young, he'd hold my hand as we ran errands, help me practice riding my bicycle, and shower me with love. The year I entered middle school was also the year my beloved brother got married and moved out. I remember Jason and his wife's wedding being full of joy. I clapped so hard my palms ached. The following year, a baby girl was born to Jason and his wife, Mary. Being the youngest in the family, I was thrilled to have a little sister-like figure in my life. We named her Heidi, and I loved her as much as my brother had loved me. Even after Heidi was born, my brother and his wife continued to dote on me, and from middle school to high school, I frequently visited their home and spent time as a part of their family. While sitting at lunch one day, I thought to myself that I hadn't seen Heidi in a while. I was now 27 years old and working for a major fruit wholesale company, directly dealing with fruit farmers for various regions. I was not initially familiar with agriculture, but I learned a bit each day by listening to the voices of the producers, and I was now a leading staff among the employees, trusted with guiding my colleagues. One stormy day, I received sudden news that shocked me. That day, a typhoon was approaching, and we finished work a bit earlier than usual. Still, the weather outside was incredibly violent during my commute home, with gusts of wind so powerful they threatened to carry me away. It was on such a stormy day that my brother, under the orders of his boss, had been forced to go out on sales rounds. Jason was very earnest and hardworking. Even on that day, he was trying to make sales even in the adverse weather and didn't slack off. As he walked through the strong wind, a sign from a building fell and struck him directly. I heard about my brother's death, and I somehow managed to get my trembling legs to take me to the hospital. By the time I arrived, everyone was already there, and my parents were hunched over, crying silently. Seeing my parents crying and the painful sight of my brother, I couldn't help but shed tears, even though I still couldn't believe what had happened. Even though I understood the situation, the reality was too hard to accept. I sat next to my brother and cried. I noticed Mary and Heidi, Jason's wife and daughter, looking as if they were in a daze, not sobbing but simply staring blankly at the wall, thinking it best to leave them be. I felt so sorry for them. From then on, we supported each other as a family even more than before. Mary, who is currently on leave from work, was a part-time worker within the scope of dependent support, and she will need a job in the future to sustain her life. My parents and I decided to support Heidi and Mary's future, including her re-employment with all our might. About a year after the funeral, Mary, who had returned to part-time work, decided to move because the rent was becoming too much for her current income. She had received compensation and workers' compensation insurance from Jason's company due to the accident at work, and of course, we agreed with Mary's prudent decision. But on the day of the move, when we went to help, we found only Heidi crying in the somewhat tidied room. Heidi holding a letter that said her mother couldn't raise her on her own, was only 16 years old. It seemed that Mary had called us to help with the move to ensure her daughter was taken care of after she left. Reading the letter, I felt a tightness in my chest, wondering if Mary had been so anxious that she wanted to run away after Jason's death. From the contents of the letter and what Heidi told me, it seemed that Mary believed it would be better for Heidi to be raised by our family than by her, who was economically unstable. Although it said she was thinking of Heidi first, what she did was equivalent to abandoning her high school daughter. Of course, I was angry at Mary, and we even went to search for her at her parents' house. However, the people who came out of the house were a family we didn't know, and we learned that not only Mary, but also her parents had moved. We contacted Mary's relatives, but there was no family willing to live with Heidi, who was a high school student and had the prospect of significant expenses for college. As a result of our discussions, we decided to take care of Heidi in my house with the support of my parents. Despite the difficult times, Heidi smiled and said, "Effie, please take good care of me." And I hugged her tightly. 11 years have passed since then, and Heidi graduated from college and found a job at a local company. When she brought up a serious conversation, I felt the passage of time and nodded. "You're 27 now, after all." Seeing that, Heidi blushed a little and said, "Effie, I'm getting married." She met her boyfriend through a friend, and he was 1 year older than Heidi, and he seemed like a gentle and fine young man from the pictures. According to Heidi, he really cares about her, and although he is usually reliable, he can be a bit off at times, and she likes that part of him too. I was really happy and repeated congratulations so many times that Heidi was amazed. The man seems to be quite busy, and I haven't met him face to face yet. Heidi would try to set up dates for me to see him, but it always falled on days that I was busy. But, in spite of her boyfriend's busy schedule, he actively participated in the wedding preparations, and Heidi seemed truly happy. When they shared with me that their ideal plan was beyond their budget, I remember my brother's wonderful wedding. I wanted Heidi to have the most memorable wedding, one that would make her happy for the rest of her life. I provided financial support as much as possible and looked forward to a ceremony filled with Heidi's dreams. On the long-awaited wedding day, as it was time to leave, I urged Heidi to prepare and made my final check on my belongings. I couldn't afford to make a mistake at my daughter's grand event, so I checked multiple times before finally setting off. As I followed Heidi down the hallway, I was already filled with so many emotions. Just the sight of her in her wedding dress was enough to make me tear up. I thought that both the groom and his parents, as well as my late brother in heaven, might laugh at me if they saw me crying so much. Still, I found these moments of contemplation to be a joy. Just as we got to the front door, Heidi turned around abruptly. She smiled gently at me and said, "Don't come, Auntie." "Huh?" "I'm telling you to not attend my wedding, Aunt Effie." I stared at Heidi, unable to comprehend what she had just told me. She burst out laughing at my confusion. "Why do you think you have the right to attend my wedding? No matter how much you did for me, to replace my mother, you're still my aunt, an outsider, right? There's no way I can introduce you as my mother to my guests." The words spoken by my niece, whom I had lived with and cherished for over 10 years, were shockingly hurtful. Indeed, I am not her biological mother. No matter how much time has passed, Heidi never called me her mom. The reality that to Heidi, her only mother was Mary, finally hit me again. I was left speechless by Heidi's words, which she uttered with a smile. There was a moment when I thought, despite having raised her this far, but I realized it was a one-sided and arrogant sentiment. It is indeed regrettable that I cannot witness my daughter's grand event. But if this is for Heidi's happiness, I will do as she says. Suppressing my feelings, I told her that I understood and gave her my blessings and decided to absent myself from the wedding. Several hours later, Heidi returned home while I was still recovering from the shock. She came into the living room laughing cheerfully, and to my surprise, behind her was Mary, who had disappeared 11 years ago. "Long time no see, Effie. You've aged a lot." Mary, who made quite a light-hearted entrance, extended her hand towards me the moment she saw my speechless face. "I'm sure you know that my daughter got married. Give us a gift. $10,000 will do. You'll be down to offer Heidi that amount, right, Auntie Effie?" Her red lipstick-clad mouth curled into a smirk. Heidi, standing next to Mary, echoed her mother's words with a similar smile. As they urged me to cough up the money quickly, the two started revealing a shocking truth. In fact, Mary's disappearance was a scheme to freely spend the insurance money and the funds from my brother's company. Mary, who had been working part-time and left the household finances to my brother, seemed to have completely changed after suddenly coming into a lot of money. Although she had never been poor, she became stingy about spending the money she had acquired, even on her daughter. Once she realized that she could control everything, her greed led her to use me, a single woman with a stable life, to raise Heidi so she could save on major expenses like college tuition. And terrifyingly, this all was a farce that Heidi was aware of. Only our family thought Mary had disappeared. She and Heidi were secretly contacting each other on their phones to prevent us from finding out, and they eventually started meeting once a month. When Heidi became a college student, her spending increased dramatically, and I heard she had started a part-time job, but in reality, she was receiving pocket money from Mary and hanging out. For Heidi, who was in her partying phase, Mary, who gave her money and let her do as she pleased every month, was undeniably the best mother. That's why Heidi coldly laughed. She deliberately refused to call me mom, knowing how much I loved her as my daughter. After Mary finished revealing the truth about her disappearance, she laughed mockingly and said, "Oh, did you perhaps use up all your savings and can't afford a gift anymore? But well, it was a more lavish ceremony than expected, so I'm proud as a mother who supported her financially for her wedding. Right, Auntie?" Mom, you're so mean. From now on, you should say for yourself. I absolutely won't take care of you after your retirement. It was fun being your pretend daughter, but bye-bye now. The two of them laughed heartily, stating that they would take the wedding expenses as a combination of a wedding gift and severance payment. They declared to cut off ties with me and left the house, claiming to attend their after-party and dinner with friends. Left behind, I was too overwhelmed by shock to comprehend the events of the past 11 years. About 30 minutes later, my parents arrived. They had been shocked at the wedding when Mary appeared as Heidi's mother, but didn't want to ruin their granddaughter's big day, so they stayed put until the ceremony ended. Afterwards, they had been looking for Mary. Unable to find her and unable to reach me, they decided to check on me at home. Seeing my parents, I broke down in tears. When I tearfully confessed everything about Heidi and Mary's scheme, my parents were furious. However, even if my parents wanted to talk directly, it seemed that Heidi had already switched off her phone and we couldn't reach her. We could have tried to locate Heidi through Jason's family, but we had raised Heidi because we wanted to. Confronting them would make us feel better, because we never expected anything in return. We could have hired a lawyer to claim back my money, but I just didn't have the courage to sue my own daughter, whom I had cherished and raised for over 10 years. After discussing the situation, we decided to let it go, as they wished. We decided to sever our ties and bury everything in the past. Once free from the situation, I took the bold step of resigning from the company I had been working for and started my own fruit wine manufacturing business. I used domestically produced fruit that could be sold due to irregular shapes or fruits that were partially damaged due to weather conditions to develop and produce my products. My new venture, which I started with the idea of reducing fruit waste while still working at my previous company, gradually gained support from not only farmers but also various supporters due to the growing concern about food waste. Though it was challenging as I embarked on this new journey, The connections I made during my corporate career helped me immensely, and I made steady progress. The business that initially ran at a loss slowly started to increase its sales over 3 to 5 years, and the consistent growth made it a company to watch in the industry. One day, Heidi suddenly visited my office. She was already crying when she arrived and ran towards me as soon as she spotted me. Surprised, but not wanting to cause a scene, I took her into the reception room.
Effie, I'm really sorry for everything. I've reflected on my actions and I need your help. I'm still like a daughter to you, right? After all, we lived together for such a long time. I'm really in trouble, Effie. Please help me financially.
A woman, now well over 30, sobbed like a toddler. A receptionist who Heidi seemed to have pushed past arrived out of breath with several other staff members, all trying to drag Heidi out of the office. Watching this scene, I felt disheartened. She was, after all, after my money. According to Heidi, by the time Mary had appeared before me, she had almost exhausted all the money she had. Unaware of this, newlyweds Heidi and Jason expected support from Mary and willingly invited her to live with them. Initially, their life together seemed to go well, but everything changed when they built a new house. Heidi's husband took out a hefty loan to build a house with unique architectural features, expecting his mother-in-law to pay for it. Heidi wanted a kitchen with the latest equipment, and Mary, assuming her son-in-law was well off, chose the best from wallpapers to lighting for her room. Their loan turned out to be a heavy burden as everyone was relying on someone else's money. To make matters worse, their lifestyle was beyond their means, and Mary's money was already depleted. Even so, Mary, claiming to have given Heidi enough pocket money, started asking for money and never worked. This drove Jason to gambling out of stress from his mother-in-law's outrageous behavior. Unbeknownst to Heidi and Mary, Heidi's husband even accrued debt under their names, leaving their household finances in shambles, regardless of how much Heidi worked.
We're now trying to sell the house as his parents suggested, but we can't find any buyers. Mom gets fired every time she tries to work, and both my husband and I are exhausted from working overtime every day. You're the only one I can rely on, Effie. If I'm not happy, Dad wouldn't be able to rest in peace either, right?
Heidi, desperately appealing to me, reached her hand out while being escorted by my staff, smearing her face with tears and snot as she asked for money. I was slightly relieved to find that my heart was unmoved by this spectacle. The matter of this mother and daughter had firmly become a thing of the past in my mind. Finally, I broke my silence. "Do you have an appointment, ma'am? Our company is not a financial institution, so we cannot lend money to strangers. If you're in trouble, please consult a bank or consumer finance company." Stunned, Heidi was lost for words when I turned back her own phrase. Stranger. That one had pushed me to the abyss of despair. Maybe she thought that if she cried and pleaded, she would get help. I followed my staff and led Heidi to the company's entrance. When she still wouldn't budge, I gently pushed her shoulder, guiding her a step outside the entrance. Realizing that I was never going to be her ally, for the first time, Heidi called me Mom. "I don't have a daughter," I said. My words must have struck her hard as she turned white and ran away. After that incident, I started receiving spam texts from Heidi and Mary, which all centered around the dire financial situation. I ignored them all, but they persistently requested money or a loan. Seeing this, it's clear that they are struggling under a crushing debt. It would be a nuisance if they call my company's front desk, even if I block their calls. So I'm receiving a bunch of texts, but I have no intention of ever replying. If they ever send something to my company, I might sue them for business obstruction. Finally recovering, I've decided to move abroad to expand my business and study to make better wines. It seems I won't have to face those two for a while, and with anticipation for my new environment, I'm dedicating myself to work every day.